Hi, this is Goich. Welcome to the Doorway to the Word. Well, today we're going to talk about Brief History of Christianity, Episode 11, the Reformation, Part 2. Well, in previous episode, in episode 10, we talked about Martin Luther, the famous Protestant Reformation. Everybody knows about this. But did you know there are more Reformations happened in Europe around the same time? And central stage was Switzerland. So let's have a look what happened in Switzerland. Well, first one is initially started by a man called Zwingli, Haldrich Zwingli, in 1523. Well, Zwingli, he built a Christian theocracy in Zurich, in Switzerland, in which the church and the state joined for the service of God. That was his ideal. He did not believe, funny enough, he did not believe that music was a necessary part of the worship of God. So he dismantled organ in the cathedral in Zurich. So in his church, there weren't any instruments. They were just singing. Sad. I like music. So that's what happened. Haldrich Zwingli. He had a Reformation. Another famous figure was John Calvin. He was born in France but exiled in Switzerland, and he developed a theology known as Calvinism, named after him, which put emphasis on predestination, that God had already predestined some people to be saved and others were predestined to eternal damnation. So in this Calvinism theory, it says salvation is according to God, it's already determined. See, it means our salvation is not our choice from our free will, but God's choice from his sovereign decision. That's what Calvinism's basic belief he came up with. Well, from his predestination theory, so let's look at this John Calvin's Reformation in a little bit more detail. Yeah, from his predestination theory, it concludes that paying for indulgence, remember indulgence, the ticket to the salvation sold by Catholic Church at that point, is no point, as means nothing before God's predestination. That was his stance against Catholic Church. At the same time, the Calvinists put emphasis on the sanctification by good works. What does it mean? That was necessary outworking of the believer's salvation, though they do not cause the believers to be saved. A little bit confusing, isn't it? See, according to Calvinist theory, the God already decided who would be saved and who wouldn't be saved since the beginning of the time. But we do not know if we were saved or not. In their belief, the man's free will to believe is under the bondage of sin. Therefore, man cannot naturally choose Christ for salvation. Basically what they're saying is our free will that we do not have ability to make a right choice, which is to choose Christ for the salvation. Only by divine intervention it can be transformed to faith. And it means that God has already decided whom he would intervene. So also they believe that the faith is a meritorious, which means deserving reward or praise, act of will of man. Therefore, even the faith for salvation is according to each man's good works that God would merit. But God has already decided who would be saved on the other hand. So you can see the little contradiction and confusion there. You see, Calvinism, the view of diligence in a good work for each individual's calling of their lives, gave justification of making money as a part of good works in their callings. For example, the merchants and so on. Merchants and traders, businessmen, they believe they are called to trade and make money. And this diligence and good work for the calling on life is justified in Calvinism. So, this Calvinism became very popular among businessmen, merchants, and traders. You see, in Christianity, in the Catholic Christianity, making money was one of the unrighteous or ungodly or unclean activities, and not many people wanted to do it, even though society needs them. But in Calvinism, he said, it's all right. God encourages it to make money. So, this belief was widely welcomed and spread, especially among, as I said, merchants, traders, business owners, and bankers, who were now justified for their trade. And it encouraged this belief, the Calvinism encouraged the progress of the capitalism, that eventually leading into industrial revolution in 18th and 19th century Europe. So this was the John Calvin's Reformation. Well, another Reformation happened in Switzerland. It was an Anabaptist movement organized in Zurich, Switzerland, and it was actually offshoot of Zwingli's Reformation. And it quickly spread to Moravia and throughout Germany. And many Anabaptists, they were persecuted in Europe by both Roman Catholics and other Protestant groups, funny enough, and many Anabaptist leaders were executed by the end of 16th century. And later, the Baptists, the Mennonites, and Quakers came out of this movement. So what do they believe, the Anabaptists? Well, they believe that only adult baptism was legitimate and dismissed the infant baptism. They considered the public confession of the sin and faith sealed by adult baptism to be the only proper baptism. That infants and young children are not accountable for sin until they become aware of good and evil and can exercise their free will to repent and to accept the baptism. They also believed that the church, the community of those who have made public commitment of faith, should be separated from the state, which they believed existed only for the punishment of the sinners. So those were the Reformations happened in Switzerland and affected European culture greatly in a later stage in modern day Europe. Well, that was the mainland Europe, but something else was happening on an island country called Britain. Well, there was a Reformation, big Reformation in Britain in 16th century. And this is what happened. The Reformation in the mainland Europe was about protesting against Catholic Church and its corruption and hypocrisy. But the Reformation in England, the Britain, had a different nature. It was political and partly personal. Well, it was initiated by Henry VIII, and he established the Church of England, the Anglican Church. So this is what happened. The Henry VIII, his wife, the Catherine of Aragon, could not bear him a male heir. Henry and Catherine could not have children. So Henry, as a king of England, he needed the heir, and he wished to divorce Catherine in order to marry his mistress to have an heir. The Catholic Church did not allow Henry to divorce Catherine. He decided to remove the Church of England from the authority of Rome. And in 1534, the Henry VIII issued acts called Acts of Supremacy, which made the king, not the Pope, the head of the Church of England. And also he retained much of Catholic doctrine. Remember, Anglican Church, the conduct based on the Catholic doctrines. He did introduce important changes, including the suppression of monasteries, the Bible in a common language in the parish church, the permission to the clergy to marry, and liturgy in English, which is known as the Book of Common Prayer. He brought all those changes in order to separate the Church of England from Catholic rule. Well, so that he could have an heir finally, marry someone else. Okay. Henry's daughter Mary Tudor became a queen after the death of her father and brother Edward, and this Mary temporarily restored Catholic Church in England in 1555, and a lot of bloodshed went on, so she is known as Bloody Mary. In 1558, the Henry's younger daughter, the Elizabeth I, the younger sister of the Mary, became a queen and cemented the Church of England's religious order by issuing a thing called Act of Supremacy, again the queen as a supreme government of the church, and she issued Acts of Uniformity, which is the all English church conduct service in English on Sunday. So that's what happened in England. At the same time, something happened in Scotland which is interesting. Well, this Reformation in Scotland was initiated by a man called John Knox. The Knox was very much influenced by the early Scottish reformer, a guy called George Wishart, who was actually banned for the heresy in 1546 by the Cardinal David Beaton, Archbishop of St. Andrews. And this Knox was very much influenced by Wishart. The return of Catholic Church and the Queen Mary of Tudor at that time, the threatened Knox, and he fled to continent to escape the persecution. Remember, Knox was Protestant and Queen Mary was Catholic. So Knox fled from England to Switzerland. And in Switzerland, Knox met John Calvin, who influenced on his idea of predestination, the Calvinism. And 1560, John Knox returned to Scotland. And previous year, the Scottish Protestant nobles rebelled against the Catholic Queen, Regent Mary of Guise, who married James V of the Scotland, who recently returned from France. He was a mother of Mary of Scott, and she was a Catholic. Remember, France was a Catholic country, and she is from there. So in Scotland, his king and the queen became Catholic, and Protestant nobles rebelled against them. That's the situation. And Mary of Guise planned to displace Elizabeth, the Queen Elizabeth of England, and unite England and Scotland and France under her daughter Mary of Scott. She had a big scheme. Well, as Knox saw the common enemy with Elizabeth, this Mary of Guise, he went to Queen Elizabeth and managed to gain alliance with England. And Elizabeth sent troops to Scotland and to repel the French. And the Queen Regent died in Edinburgh Castle and brought Scottish Protestants a victory. Well, while the daughter, the Mary of Scott, was still absent in France, Scottish Parliament adopted the Scots Confession, thing called the Scots Confession, which abolished papal jurisdiction. It means that Scotland declared, we are Protestant, breaking away from Catholic influence officially. Well, Knox also funded, he was a part of this, and Knox also funded Presbyterian system in church, which had elected elders govern the church affairs, not the bishops. It's a beginning of congregationalism. Well, so that's what the Knox did in Scottish Reformation. And this series of Reformation stormed through Europe in protest against the Catholic Church, and this was about the birth of Protestant churches. In response, interesting, to the rapid spread of Protestantism throughout Europe, Catholic Church had to do something, had to act first to maintain its authority and position. So they did something. In next episode, the episode 12, we will look at the Catholic Church's response to all those Protestant Reformation storming in Europe. Well, until then, God bless. Goodbye.